All right, good morning, guys. Everything new under the sun. December 20th, 2019. And what I want to look at today is what brought about the destruction in the Bible, the significant events, the flood, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. What brought about these major supernatural events, rather? What were the trigger points for these? Because I suspect that the next great supernatural destruction event will be brought about by similar sorts of activities or sins. And so the big question is, well, what caused the flood? What got God so angry to bring about the flood? What caused him to say, I need to judge the planet and men now? What was the red line? What did they cross in terms of sin that God said, now is the time, I need to deal with this now, supernaturally, not just let them die a natural death. Oftentimes, people who are great sinners, even murderers, will just die a natural death. And that's part of the punishment, I think. And of course, eternity in hell if they don't repent. But that's part of the punishment. So there's part of a natural punishment that occurs. But when God steps in supernaturally and says, nope, I'm going to end it now, I'm not going to let this go on, that's significant. And I think that will be gives us an indication of what the ultimate red line is for the end of this age, going into the millennial reign of Christ. What is the cause of that? And so looking at the previous massive supernatural destructions of the world, first one I want to take a look at is the flood. And then we're going to take a look at a couple of articles which I think lead us to say that, we're on this path right now and it's not getting better. Let's go to this article here. This article is about, let's see, I think you can see all that. This is about what were the reasons for the flood? Why would God destroy the entire world, the humankind and beasts? And so there's a number of reasons for it. Now I just want to talk through what the reasons are. And as we talk through these, think about how the current state of the world, what the world is like right now. Corruption of the race. It is argued that the sons of God marrying the daughters of men was the cause for the flood. Those holding the angelic interpretation of the sons of God argue that only some so terrible as angelic interaction with humanity could be the cause of the flood. So that's one cause. Angels coming down and basically having sex with the daughters of men. And these created the giants of old, the superheroes, if you will, the mythical supermen from Greek myth. Now, the next one is rulers demanded worship. Now, this is kind of interesting. What do we know about the last days? There will come a one world leader that demands worship. And he is going to sit on the throne in the third temple and cause the abomination of desolation. It says, those who hold that the sons of God were ancient rulers argue that the kings of earth corrupted themselves to the point where they were claiming to be half God, half man. And again, you think about Hercules and all these other apparently mythical gods. I think these were real, if not real, then they were based upon these sons of God, so-called, prior to the flood, these giants, these superhumans who maybe had supernatural abilities because they were mixed with the angels. These so-called offerings of the gods were worshipped by their people, and this is part of the issue where you have a man or a ruler, and they demand to be worshipped. This is one of God's red lines, and isn't this exactly what happens at the midpoint of the 7-year period? There is a apparent ruler who declares himself God and sits on the throne in the third temple. This is blasphemous. This is a red line where God immediately comes back and says, no, that's it. I'm going to deal with the earth at this point. So I think that's interesting. The fact that this specific item lines up with what end time Bible prophecy tells us as being kind of the red line, the point at which God comes back and says, nope, that's it, not going to let it go on any farther. Increase in wickedness. Now, this is a big thing that obviously happened at the time of the flood and is happening now. And we're going to talk about scriptures that or articles that give us an idea of what's happening. So scriptures make a tremendous emphasis on sin as the cause of the flood. It says the idea of violence in this context is more than the unavoidable warfare that arises between human and I skipped down. Sorry. Let me go up to here. Scripture makes tremendous emphasis on sin as the cause of the flood. Humankind was multiplying, and people were making decisions on marrying based upon fleshly choice rather than the will of God. The Bible clearly says that wickedness increased to a degree that God had no choice but to wipe out all humanity. So men, women, in this day and age, you can't even call people men and women anymore. They're making choices to marry purely out of the lust of the flesh, and they weren't following God's order. And this was another red line where it got bad, and it did start to occur. But after it started occurring, God said, you know what, that's it. I'm going to come supernaturally destroy the earth. It says they were not only evil, they were evil continually. And that's the big thing. There's lots of evil in this world, but are most of the men in this world evil continually? Does God just see evil continually all day, every day? And that's one of the red lines. That's when God says, oh, I need to come down and deal with this. I suggest to you that when people are desperate during an economic collapse, which I think is going to be kind of part and parcel of all the events of the last days, what's going to be occurring during this period of economic collapse and rebuilding is a sort of a Mad Max scenario where people are desperate. There's roving gangs. There's violence. The love of many, the wax cold because of the violence and trouble in the world. People, there will be no love anymore. There will be evil continually because people are just trying to survive at that point. And there will be no love for your neighbor at that point. And people will just be trying to kill each other for food. And so I think the one unifier globally is a worldwide economic collapse. And I think it seems to fit what the scriptures describe as being the cause of the supernatural wrath in the flood and what is to come as well. Violence in the last days. And again, I think this is really confirmed by or something that would be the exact outcome of a worldwide economic collapse. Not just war, because you can have rebuilding, and if you have war, you just have a certain place that is in war, such as the Middle East or a particular country where the war is actually physically going on. But around, in the rest of the world, people are kind of living their lives. They may be doing something for the war effort, but generally the buying and selling is continuing. People are eating. Some people are doing better than others, but generally life goes on, even though World War II or World War I exists. But if you have mass violence across the world, that would speak to me to an economic collapse. There's another factor that enters in violence. The idea of violence in the context is more than unavoidable warfare that arises between human beings. It is a malicious, oppressive violence. That sounds to me like people are desperate, roving around in gangs looking for food. That anyone would recognize as sinful. It is interesting to note that Jewish interpreters in the past believe that the violence or lawlessness arose from too much ease and affluence. So that's interesting. Is there too much ease and affluence? I don't think that's the cause. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. These people had everything that they wanted and consequently had to invent new type of distractions. I would suggest to you that North America has everything they could ever want right now, and so when economic collapse does occur, they're not used to going without, and so they are basically desperate and crazy because they have no idea how to deal without things, to deal without milk and bread and eggs. They have no idea how to plant a garden. So it's I would suggest to you that that is in fact how it would play out in this day and age. What happened to Sodom and Gomorrah? And so the biblical picture of Sodom and Gomorrah where two angels headed to a city where Lot and his family were, and they went to destroy it, but to first warn Lot to get out. And so what is the story with this? Let me bring this into focus. There we go. Why did God destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? The story of sin in the Bible. I won't read all of it, but it says the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is a cautionary tale of destructive consequences of sin. Sodom and Gomorrah were mentioned in Genesis, notorious for their flagrant sin. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great that their sin is so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. It says, when Abraham learned of God's plan to destroy the city, Abraham asked if God would spare some people, and he was looking to spare Lot and his family. It says, according to Smith's Bible Dictionary, Sodom was one of the most ancient cities of Syria. It is commonly mentioned in connection with Gomorrah, but also with Admah and Zeboim, and on one occasion, Genesis 14, with Bela and Zoar. Sodom was evidently the chief town in the settlement. And so what was the big thing happening there? Well, Sodom. And that's where we got our word sodomy from, and sodomites. One of the most prevalent sins in Sodom was homosexuality of men engaging in sexual relations with other men and boys. Sodom is where we get the term sodomy and sodomites, named after the widespread sin in the town. After the angels entered the home of Lot, the men of the city surrounded the house. According to Genesis 19:5, they called Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so that we can have sex with them." And Lot even offered his 2 virgin daughters, and that wasn't enough, apparently, for the people of the city of Sodom. So you can see this massive issue with lust, and lust that was just clouding everything, that all they could see. They didn't care about anything else. They just wanted sex. And not only sex, but homosexual sex, fornication. This is what they were doing. And so you don't only have pockets of this going on in Sodom, but apparently all the men of the city wanted this. And this is, again, one of the red lines where not only do you have evil, but you have evil continually. And this is a red line where God says, that's enough, that's it. And so are we there yet? This is a big question. I don't think we're there yet, because there's large pockets of Christians where there is not evil continually. Certainly we can do evil, but we're not evil continually. If you are, then you're not of reborn. You're not saved in Jesus Christ if you're continually doing evil. But there are people in the world who maybe you'd consider continually doing evil, and doing it flagrantly, doing it blasphemously, even putting it in the face of God, saying, you know what, I'm doing this, God. What are you going to do about it? And so we're not quite there yet, but there will come a time when you think about the world leader, and requiring people to be worshipped. You think of that red line, and you think, what could we, if that is at the midpoint of the 7-year tribulation, and we are maybe 4 years out from the 7-year period, from the midpoint of that 7-year period, if the timing is correct, with 2028 being this last, the 6,000 years of man, the time being up for that, could the world get there in terms of homosexuality, in terms of sexual perversion? And I would argue we're kind of on our way there. This is from ChristianPost.com. And this is really disturbing for a number of reasons. 35 psychologists resign from UK gender identity clinic with 3,000 kids on a wait list. So this is a clinic in the UK that has a huge wait list for all the people who, all the kids who, they don't know any better. They're not adults. They're probably not making this decision purely on their own. There's probably influence. There's other factors. And their parents are willingly taking them to this clinic to see if they can receive drugs, so that they can change their gender by way of drugs, not just letting the natural course of things happen, but they're trying to use drugs, pharmaceuticals, pharmakeia, to change their gender. And the psychologists now at this center are starting to resign because they see that they're just handing out drugs to kids who don't know any better, whose parents are probably influencing them and indeed enabling them, driving them here. And they're drugging up little children who don't know any better. And so psychologists are quitting. 35 psychologists have resigned from the children's identity service in London in the last 3 years, as there have been exponential increase in referrals. Sky News reached out to 20 of the 35 who resigned. It says 6 former NHS psychologists who spoke with Sky News expressed concerns about the over-authorizing of hormone treatment to the children who were to the children with gender dysphoria, and felt they couldn't properly explore underlying psychological factors. So is this just, they were born this way, or are there other environmental factors that may have led to this? Well, there's been a massive increase in the number of kids going there. Our fears are that the young children are being over-diagnosed and then over-medicalized. They're giving drugs to kids who don't need drugs, who think they want to change their gender, probably by encouragement by their parents. And this is one of these absolute sins, evil from God's point of view. I think when parents, adults who are supposed to know better, encourage their children who don't know better to take drugs to change their gender, to really mess up and screw up their whole lives. I think God is going to come strongly down on these people and deal with this. But it may get to a point where God's saying, you know what, they still have free choice. I still want to give them free choice, but this grieves me, and this is scary. It says, we're extremely concerned about the consequences for the young people who, they don't know any better. They're not of a particular age of reason where they can say, you know what, this may affect my whole life. Do I really want to be doing this? For those of us who have previously worked in the service, we fear that we have had front row seats to a medical scandal. It says the psychologist said that the patient had a history of trauma. So one of the patients who wanted this, they had a history of trauma and suffered from other things happening to them, such as abuse. So you get abuse, you get sexual abuse, mental abuse, and this causes kids to go into areas where maybe they start thinking, well, to get out of this abuse or to help me feel better, maybe I want to take a bunch of drugs and change my gender. So these kids aren't coming in here saying, I want to change my gender because I feel like a girl or a boy for no reason. They're being abused, many of them, or they've had some other traumatic events. And to drug them up to change genders is no way to deal with that. And this is what these psychologists are coming to the conclusion of. And so these people are quitting, apparently left, right, and center, because they think, and they had front row seats to a medical scandal that's occurring right now here. And so drugging up the children, I think this is one of these things where God says, these innocent kids, I can't allow this to happen anymore. And, according to the previous destructions in the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah, the flood of Noah, these things build up to a point, and God does allow them to occur because we have free choice. He doesn't want to stop our free choice, but at some point he does say, this is too much. And especially when you start doing this against the little children who can't defend themselves, there will be a point, I think, sooner than later where God says, no, I'm not going to allow this to keep going. Another, and I could give you article after article, every day about this stuff. Let me go here. Make this smaller here so I can see it. And so, like I said, I could show you article after article every day about these things happening. Fake news media driving the narrative that men can give birth shows we are in the grip of a global end-time spirit of insanity and delusion. This is now the end begins.com. And I think it's right. I'm not going to go through the article, but the story is basically the man you see in the picture there was a woman I guess started taking testosterone, whatever, to make them into a man. But they were still able to give birth because they still had, obviously, all the other body parts to be able to give birth. Last year, 13 men gave birth in New South Wales, Australia. Medicare figures released this week shows that among 22 men nationwide, there were among 22 men nationwide to give birth during 2019. Out of more than 35,000 people to give birth nationwide. That's slightly up from the previous year, in which 15 men, men, quote unquote, transgender, but it is well down on the 55 men who gave birth in 2014, 2015, 44 men who gave birth in 2015, 2016, and 37 men in 2016, 2017. The men are transgender men who are still physically able to bear children, but you can see the madness. People just making a mockery of what God designed in the beginning: Adam and Eve, male and female. It doesn't only the Genesis doesn't just go to name them, Adam and Eve, but it says male and female, and over it says male and female. That's what God designed. And so what people are doing is the man is pretending to be the woman, and the woman is trying to pretend to be the man. Meanwhile, they're still using God-given traits of birth in this case to be able to give birth. So it's ridiculous. It says the men are transgender men who are physically able to bear children. So that means they are still women, and that's true. But they're growing hair. They're taking testosterone, so they look more like men. And this is all part of the end days evil in the world, where the evil is prevalent continually. And this is only going to grow as people just want to do their own thing. They don't want to recognize the guidelines, the lines in the sand that God has drawn, the rules. They don't want to go by God's rules. They want to change things up as much as possible. And so they're just they're absolutely reversing things. A woman becomes man becomes a woman. They get together. Apparently the man has a baby. And so this is what's happening in this world. And this maybe was happening in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, the days of Lot. Evil continually. And this is really what is happening in the previous times of wrath that have come upon the world. So will we see when God's wrath comes upon the world again, will we see all these things happening? I think we'll see pretty much these exact things happening. And isn't this what we see in Matthew 24, Luke 21? Increase of wickedness and wickedness throughout, and continually evil. The thoughts of men continually evil. That's what we see. We're going to see violence. And I think this violence is going to come out of economic collapse, where people are desperate, and so they become violent. They lose the love because they're just desperate at that point in time. And rulers demand worship, and this is one of those big things that says, you know what? This is exactly what the Bible describes in the last days. There will be a one world ruler who will demand worship from the world, and he's eventually going to think he's such a ruler that he's going to sit on the throne in the third temple, and demand people worship him. And this is the red line here, where you say, I'm God. But prior to that, there's going to be increase in wickedness, violence. The hearts of men will be continually evil, and that's going to bring about not the flood, not the fire and brimstone of Sodom and Gomorrah, but the fiery wrath of God. The Bible says that God destroyed the earth once with the flood, and that a flood would not be used again, but fire in the last days. Fire would be the ultimate destruction and wrath brought upon the world. God's going to cleanse the world with fire prior to the millennial reign of Christ, I believe. And so this is what's coming upon man. The wickedness in the world is great. And we can see the parallels between the previous destructions of the planet and men and cities, and what is coming upon us, what we see in everyday news. And so I think we should all be prepared for this. We should be cognizant of it. We should be watching for it. This is what's happening in these last days, guys. Thanks for watching. This is a subject that's not very happy It's not very nice. No one really wants to talk about it. But every once in a while, you got to come back to the truth, and you got to say, you know what? This is what's happening. This is what has caused the wrath of God to come down on the earth. This is what we're moving into. And it's not bad yet. I will say anything you see in the newspapers, that's nothing compared to what it's going to be like just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. The abomination of the time at which the abomination of desolation happens. That this is nothing. What's happening right now today is nothing compared to what's going to be happening. And these are all red lines that has been paralleled in the past, has occurred in the past. There's nothing new under the sun, S-U-N, as the Bible says in Ecclesiastes. And so the same sins that were happening prior to the flood, prior to Sodom and Gomorrah, that caused them will be happening in these last days. And we're getting there. So one of the big signposts, the key indicators about where we are on the prophetic timeline is where the hearts of men are in terms of being evil continually, evil sometimes, and the expanse of this LGBTQ plus P, etc., and look into what each of those letters means. They've added a P for pedophilia now, and this is what's coming upon us. And this, we're nowhere yet as near as bad as it will be at that time when God says, all right, that is enough. The hearts of men are continually evil, and now I need to bring some justice on the world. And that's how we want to phrase it. It's not a wrath just for the sake of wrath. It's justice. To do these little children justice who are being given drugs and they don't know any better. It's to bring justice on the world where sexual immorality is traumatizing, preying upon people who otherwise wouldn't want to be involved in it, etc. So it's justice that God is going to bring to the world. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll leave it there, and we'll see you guys in the next video.